All right, welcome back, everyone. And today we're going deep into a topic that's both fascinating and incredibly important: how AI is being used to understand chest x-rays.
Chest X-rays or CXRs, yeah, they're incredibly common. In fact, you probably know someone who has had one, maybe even yourself.
Oh, for sure. I've definitely had my fair share.
Well, they're the most frequent type of diagnostic imaging done worldwide. We're talking billions of them every single year.
Billions. Wow. That's a staggering number. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. CXRs are kind of the go-to for so many different medical issues.
Right. And each of those images, they need to be carefully analyzed. That's where radiologists come in. And their job is, well, it's incredibly detailed and can be really time-consuming.
Yeah, our sources really highlighted that, spending hours meticulously going over each image, making sure they don't miss any crucial details. I can see how that could quickly add up with the sheer volume of CXRs they need to interpret. It's a lot of pressure.
Absolutely. So it's no wonder that there's so much interest and excitement, really, around the idea of using AI to help with this process. Could AI make it faster? Could it make it even more accurate? These are the big questions researchers are tackling.
And that brings us to what we're focusing on in this deep dive: an AI agent called MedRax. But before we get into the specifics of MedRax, it's important to acknowledge that AI has already been making inroads into the world of CXR analysis for a while, right? We've seen these different AI tools pop up that can do things like categorize images, like this is a normal chest x-ray, this one shows signs of pneumonia, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen tools that can highlight specific areas of interest in an image, maybe circle a suspicious-looking spot on the lung or outline the heart, and some can even help draft initial reports based on the image. So there's definitely been progress.
So, if these individual AI tools are proving to be helpful, what's the main thing holding back their widespread use? Why aren't they more common in clinics and hospitals?
Well, the big challenge has been that these tools tend to work in isolation. Each one is really good at its specific task, but they haven't been great at working together.
I see. So it's like having a bunch of specialists, each with their own expertise, but they're all working in separate silos.
Exactly. And when a doctor is looking at a chest x-ray, they're not just asking one isolated question, right? They're trying to piece together a bigger picture. They need to integrate different types of information, ask multiple questions, and connect the dots. And the current AI tools, they haven't been very good at doing that.
So how do these large foundation models we keep hearing about offer a possible solution to this problem of fragmentation?
Foundation models, especially these large language models, the LMMs, and their counterparts for handling images, the large multimodal models, or LMMs, represent this sort of paradigm shift in AI. The idea is you take these massive AI systems and train them on just tons and tons of data, both text and images, so they develop this really broad understanding of the world.
So like GPT-4, which everyone's been talking about.
Right, GPT-4. It showed a surprising ability to actually understand and reason about medical concepts, even though it wasn't specifically trained for medicine. And this is kind of the exciting thing about these foundation models. They have the potential to generalize their knowledge to new domains.
That's incredible. And there are even more specialized models emerging within the medical field that our sources highlight, like Elevate Med and ChestAgentBench, right?
Exactly. LaviMed was trained on a huge data set of medical images and their descriptions. It became really good at answering questions about those images, even images it had never seen before. It could apply what it had learned in this zero-shot way, which is a big step forward. And then you have ChestAgent, which focused specifically on chest x-rays, and it was able to achieve some really impressive results, even though it wasn't as big as some of those massive general-purpose models.
So that all sounds very promising. Are we at the point where these powerful foundation models can simply take over the job of a radiologist? Are they ready to start interpreting CXRs all on their own?
Well, not quite yet. While these models are super impressive and getting better all the time, they still have some significant limitations, especially when we're talking about something as critical as medicine, where accuracy is absolutely paramount.
Right, stakes are very high.
Exactly. One of the big challenges is that these models can sometimes hallucinate.
Hallucinate, like they're seeing things that aren't really there.
Yeah, they can make up information or generate outputs that don't actually correspond to what's in the image. Obviously, in a medical context, that's a huge problem.
Yeah, no kidding. It's not something you want to be dealing with when you're trying to make a diagnosis. What other challenges do these models face?
Well, another big one is multi-step reasoning. Think about how a radiologist works. They systematically examine the image, looking at all the different parts, comparing one area to another, and then they connect the dots between different findings. It's a very complex process. And these end-to-end foundation models, even the powerful ones, they often struggle with this kind of multi-step reasoning.
I see. So they might be able to answer a simple question about a very obvious feature, but when it comes to more nuanced, multi-layered analysis, they fall short.
Yeah, and there's also the issue of transparency. Their internal workings can be a bit of a black box, which makes it difficult to understand how they arrived at a particular conclusion. And while they have this broad knowledge, they can lack the very specialized expertise that AI tools specifically designed for medical tasks often possess.
So it seems like we need something that can kind of bridge this gap. We need something that can bring together the flexibility and adaptability of those big foundation models with the precision and reliability of specialized medical AI tools. And that's where MedRax enters the scene.
Exactly. MedRax is specifically designed to tackle this challenge. It's not just a single big AI model trying to do everything on its own. It's more like a framework, a system that can seamlessly integrate and coordinate multiple existing AI tools, each of which is already good at a particular aspect of CXR analysis.
So instead of one massive brain trying to do it all, it's more like a team of specialized experts working together.
I like that analogy, a team of experts. And MedRax acts as the coordinator, bringing together the right experts for the task at hand. It figures out how to break down a complex question into smaller, more manageable steps, and then delegates those steps to the tools that are best suited for the job.
Okay, so how does that work in practice? What's the mechanism that allows MedRax to orchestrate all these different tools?
At the heart of MedRax is a large language model, an LLM. And this LLM is running what's called a REACT loop. REACT stands for reasoning and acting, so it's a constant back and forth. The LLM starts by observing the question, looking at the image, taking in all the available information. Then it thinks, okay, what do I need to do to answer this? Which tools will be helpful, and in what order should I use them? That's the reasoning part. And then it takes action. It actually executes those tools, gets their outputs, and incorporates those findings back into its reasoning process.
So it's not just a straight line from input to output. There's this constant loop of thinking and doing.
Exactly. And to make this work even better, MedRax uses short-term memory.
Short-term memory, how does that fit in?
Well, it allows the system to keep track of the conversation. It remembers what questions have already been asked, what tools have been used, and what the results were. This is important for handling follow-up questions or situations where it needs to refine its analysis based on new information.
So it's almost like having a real conversation with the system. You can build on previous questions and get more and more specific as you go along.
That's the idea. And to accomplish all of this, MedRax integrates a whole range of state-of-the-art models for different CXR tasks.
Yeah, let's get into some of those. We have visual question answering, or VQA, for example. What kind of models are being used for that?
So for VQA, MedRax utilizes models like ChestAgent, which, as we mentioned earlier, is specifically designed for chest X-ray interpretation. It's trained on a massive data set of chest X-rays, and it's really good at understanding those visual nuances that are so important in this context. MedRax also incorporates LiveAMed, that powerful biomedical visual language model we talked about, the one that's really good at zero-shot learning. So by combining these different approaches, MedRax can answer open-ended questions about the CXR, drawing both on what it sees in the image and its broad medical knowledge.
That's amazing. And then there's the task of actually identifying and outlining specific structures within the image, the segmentation part. What models does MedRax use for that?
For segmentation, there's MedSam. That's a super advanced biomedical segmentation model. It's been trained on a huge data set of medical images, not just CXRs, but images from various different types of scans. It can segment all sorts of anatomical structures and abnormalities across a range of diseases. And then there's PSPNet, which is more specialized for chest X-rays. It's trained on a data set specifically annotated with common chest diseases and abnormalities.
So MedSam is like the generalist, and PSPNet is the chest specialist. I like it. Our notes also mention grounding. What does that refer to in this context?
Grounding is the ability to link specific words or phrases in a text description, like a radiology report, to the corresponding regions in the image. So if a report says something like there's an area of consolidation in the lower left lobe, a grounding model can highlight exactly where that is on the X-ray. And for this, MedRax utilizes MER2, which is a large vision language model that excels at grounding text descriptions in medical images.
Okay, so it's bridging the gap between language and visuals. That's really cool. And what about the task of actually generating those detailed radiology reports?
For report generation, MedRax employs a powerful combination of a SWIN-V2 transformer model with a BERT decoder. This model is trained on a massive data set of expert-written radiology reports, and it can generate really comprehensive summaries of the findings in the CXR.
Wow, so it's learning to write reports just like human radiologists. And then, of course, there's the core task of identifying and classifying diseases and abnormalities, right?
Exactly. And for that, MedRax uses a DenseNet 121 model. This is a very well-established model in the field, and it's trained on multiple large chest X-ray data sets. It can accurately predict the presence of various conditions like pneumonia, collapsed lung, fluid buildup, nodules, and more.
So it's like having this whole panel of specialized AI doctors all working together within one system. It's pretty remarkable. And I see that it even includes a tool for generating realistic chest X-rays from text descriptions. That's Röntgen, right?
That's right. Röntgen is based on a powerful image generation model called Stable Diffusion, but it's been adapted specifically for chest X-rays. So you can give it a text prompt describing certain anatomical features or conditions, and it can create a realistic-looking X-ray that matches that description.
Why would you want to do that? What's the benefit of being able to generate synthetic chest X-rays?
Well, there are several potential uses. One is for training new AI models. You can use these synthetic X-rays to augment your training data, especially for rare conditions that might not be well represented in real-world data sets. It can also be a valuable tool for medical education, allowing students to visualize different conditions and practice interpreting X-rays without needing access to real patient data. And it can be used for research, potentially enabling studies that would otherwise be difficult or impossible to do with real patient data because of privacy concerns.
That's fascinating. So it's like a whole new way to create and use medical images. And beyond all these core tasks, MedRax also includes various utility tools for things like processing those DICOM image files, generating plots and charts, and visualizing data. It really does seem like a comprehensive toolkit.
It really is. And throughout the whole process, the AI agent, driven by that LLM, is constantly monitoring the outputs of all these tools. It's checking for errors, inconsistencies, and using that feedback to decide what to do next. It can even cache the results of tools it's already used so it doesn't have to rerun them every time, and it can run some tools in parallel to save time.
So it's getting smarter and more efficient as it goes along. Now, to really put MedRax to the test, the researchers created a new benchmark called ChestAgentBench. Why did they need to create a new benchmark, and what makes this one more challenging than the existing ones?
That's a great question. You see, the existing benchmarks for evaluating AI in this area often focused on relatively simple single-step tasks, like is there a nodule in this image, or what's the size of the heart?
So they weren't really capturing the complexity of real-world CXR interpretation.
Right, and that's why they developed ChestAgentBench. It's designed to be much more comprehensive and to assess the kind of complex multi-step reasoning that a radiologist needs to do.
So it's more aligned with the actual challenges that a radiologist faces on a daily basis.
Exactly. It's a much larger scale benchmark with 2,500 questions, and all those questions are derived from real clinical cases that have been validated by experts. They also made it much more rigorous by using a structured format, where each question has 6 possible answers.
6 possible answers. How does that work?
Well, it makes the evaluation much more robust and reproducible. Instead of just having a yes or no question or a free-form answer, you have these 6 choices, and the AI has to select the best one based on its analysis of the image and the clinical information. And this multiple-choice format really forces the AI to be precise in its reasoning. It can't just get lucky with a vague answer.
That makes sense. So how did they actually come up with these 2,500 questions? What kind of cases are we talking about?
The researchers used a really interesting approach. They took these real clinical cases from the EuroRad database.
EuroRad?
EuroRad is the European Society of Radiology's peer-reviewed case report database. Yeah. It's a massive resource, one of the largest of its kind. They specifically focused on the chest imaging section of EuroRad and pulled out 675 patient cases that had both the chest X-rays and the detailed medical reports from those cases.
So they're working with real patient data, real diagnoses, and real expert opinions. And this covers a wide range of chest conditions, right?
Yes, it's very diverse, covering 53 different areas of interest in the chest, everything from con and things like pneumonia and collapsed lungs to more rare conditions. And to generate the specific questions for the benchmark, they used GPT-4o, that powerful language model we've been talking about.
Oh, interesting. So they're using AI to help create the benchmark for testing AI.
Yeah, they gave GPT-4o access to the clinical case information. and asks it to come up with questions that would test different analytical skills. So they might give it a case with a chest X-ray showing pneumonia, and they'd say, okay, generate a question that assesses the AI's ability to compare the severity of the disease in the left and right lungs. And GPT-4o would then come up with a question and 6 possible answers based on that prompt.
That's clever. And how did MedRax actually perform on this new, more challenging benchmark compared to other AI systems?
It did really well. Significantly better, in fact, than all the other models they tested. It achieved an overall accuracy of 63%.
63%. That's pretty impressive, considering the complexity of the task.
And it was a notable improvement over models like GPT-4o, which, even though it was used to create the questions, only achieved about 56% accuracy when it was actually answering them.
Wow, so even the AI that wrote the test couldn't ace it.
Yeah, which kind of shows how challenging this benchmark really is. And specialized medical AI models like ChestAgent did even worse, scoring around 39%.
So it seems like MedRax's approach of combining general reasoning with specialized tools is really paying off. But it's also interesting that the more general AI models, the ones that weren't specifically trained for medicine, like GPT-4o and Llama 3.290B, actually did better than the specialized medical AI on this complex benchmark. What does that tell us?
That was a surprising finding, and I think it speaks to the importance of having those broad reasoning abilities when it comes to complex tasks. It suggests that even though the specialized medical AI models might be very good at specific tasks, they can lack the more general problem-solving skills that are needed to really excel in this multi-step reasoning environment.
So it's like having a specialist who is brilliant in their field, but they might not be as adaptable when faced with a problem outside their area of expertise?
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And what MedRax seems to be doing is bringing those two worlds together. It's combining that broad reasoning capability with the specialized knowledge of the individual tools.
That's really cool. And how did MedRax do on other benchmarks, like ChestAgentBench? We touched on that briefly earlier.
It also performed very well on ChestAgentBench, particularly on the visual question answering tasks. In some cases, it even outperformed both GPT-4o and ChestAgent on those tasks, showing its ability to really understand and interpret visual information.
That's impressive. But you mentioned that all the models, including MedRax, had some trouble with the tasks that require more complex reasoning between the image and text. It seems like that's still a challenge for AI in general.
Absolutely. That's definitely an area where more research is needed.
Now, the research paper includes a couple of really interesting case studies that illustrate how MedRax works in practice. Can you walk us through one of them? The one about medical device identification caught my eye.
Sure. In this case, the task was to identify the type of tube that was visible in a patient's chest X-ray. Now, GPT-4o, when presented with this case, incorrectly identified the tube as an endotracheal tube, which is a breathing tube.
So it made a mistake. Why do you think it made that mistake?
It seems like it's probably thrown off by the location of the tube. It saw that the tube was centrally located, which is typical for breathing tubes, and it just kind of jumped to that conclusion. But MedRax took a more thorough approach. It utilized multiple tools, including the report generation and visual question answering tools, and it was able to correctly identify the tube as a chest tube, not a breathing tube.
Wow, so it was able to correct the mistake that GPT-4o made.
Right, and what's really interesting is that one of the individual VQA tools initially gave an incorrect answer, also identifying the tube as a breathing tube. But MedRax, by using its reasoning capabilities and integrating information from multiple sources, was able to resolve that conflict and arrive at the correct answer.
That's really impressive. It shows that it's not just blindly following what the individual tools are saying. It's actually thinking critically and making its own judgment. What about that other case study, the one about multi-step disease diagnosis?
Yeah, in that case, the task was to diagnose the predominant disease that was visible on the chest X-ray, and then to compare the severity of that disease in the left and right lungs. And GPT-4o, again, struggled with this one. It misdiagnosed the patient with pneumonia and said that the pneumonia was worse in the right lung.
Another mistake.
Yeah. But MedRax, by systematically using a combination of tools, first using the report generation tool to get an initial overview of potential issues, and then using the segmentation tool to analyze the lung areas in more detail, was able to correctly identify a collapsed left lung as the primary issue.
So it was able to break down that complex diagnostic problem into a series of smaller, more manageable steps and use the right tools for each step. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was really cool to see how it approached that problem. It very much mirrored the kind of thought process that a human radiologist would go through.
So overall, what are the key takeaways from this research? What does it tell us about the future of AI and CXR interpretation?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that this structured approach, where you're combining a large language models for reasoning with these specialized expert tools, is really powerful. It's clearly more effective than trying to do everything with just one big AI model. And the way MedRax uses this REACT framework, this loop of reasoning and acting, seems to be a key factor in its improved performance. It also makes the whole process more transparent, which is really important in medicine. We want to be able to understand how these systems are arriving at their conclusions. And as we've seen, the strong performance of those general AI models, the ones that weren't trained specifically on medical data, really highlights the importance of having those broad reasoning capabilities.
It's like having a strong foundation of general knowledge is essential, even if you also have specialized expertise in a particular area.
Exactly.
Now, no system is perfect, of course. What are some of the limitations of MedRax that the researchers have identified?
Well, they point out that it can still struggle when the outputs from different tools are contradictory, especially when it comes to those very subtle, fine-grained visual tasks. And because it's running multiple tools, it can be more computationally expensive and potentially slower than some of those simpler end-to-end models. And at this stage, it doesn't have really robust methods for quantifying its uncertainty. It can't say, I'm 90% sure about this diagnosis, or I'm only 50% sure about this finding.
I see. So there's still room for improvement. What are some of the future directions they're looking at?
One area they're investigating is how to better balance the use of different tools. They've noticed that if you overuse some tools or underuse others, it can actually hurt performance. So figuring out that optimal balance is important. They're also interested in applying techniques from reinforcement learning to further improve the AI's reasoning capabilities. And of course, the next big step is to actually test this system in real clinical settings. They want to see how it performs with real patients and how it integrates into the workflow of a busy hospital or clinic.
That makes sense. Moving from the lab to the real world is always the big challenge.
Absolutely. And other things they're exploring include optimizing tool selection, so figuring out which tools are best for a given problem, developing methods for uncertainty-aware reasoning so the AI can tell us how confident it is in its conclusions, and expanding the framework to other types of medical images beyond chest X-rays.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. It's clear that MedRax is a big step forward in the world of AI-driven chest X-ray interpretation. It really showcases the power of combining these large-scale reasoning models with the specialized expertise of these individual tools.
I agree, and I think it raises some interesting questions about how we approach complex problem solving in other domains.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if the principles behind MedRax could be applied in other areas of healthcare, like analyzing CT scans or MRIs, or even in completely different fields altogether.
Definitely. Think about fields like finance, law, engineering, anywhere where you have complex data to analyze and you need to integrate different types of expertise.
It's really exciting to think about the potential. So as you go about your day-to-day, think about what complex problems could be tackled by intelligently combining different specialized tools under the guidance of a powerful reasoning engine. What could we achieve if we could create systems that can think and act in this way? That's some food for thought. And that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.